He was smiling in the photograph the way he smiled at me on the morning we got married. "That's my fiancé," the young woman at the next desk said, turning the silver frame toward me like she was sharing the best secret in the world. "We're getting married in the spring, 2 years together, and he still makes me feel like the only person in his room." The office smelled of fresh paint and burnt coffee from a machine that had not been cleaned since the building opened. Somewhere behind me, a printer warmed up with a low, mechanical hum. I had practiced this morning in the mirror. Stand straight. Soft handshake. Warm, but not eager. 40 isn't the age you announce yourself. It's the age you let the work speak. I had repeated all of that to myself in the car. I had not practiced this. Because the man in that photograph, the one in the pale linen shirt with the water of Kiawah Island behind him, was my husband, Daniel. The same Daniel who had pressed a cup of coffee into my hands an hour earlier and told me to go be brilliant on my first day. I did not drop my bag. I did not make a sound. I set my laptop on the desk, sat down in the cold, ergonomic chair, and felt the floor of my whole life quietly fall away beneath me without a single thing in the room moving. My name is Vivian Ashford. I am 39 years old, and I spent 11 years auditing other people's lives for a living before I ever learned to see my own. By the end of that month, my husband would learn that the quietest person in any room is usually the one keeping the records. Let me back up, because the photograph was not the beginning. The photograph was just the day I started counting. I grew up in a house where money was a held breath. My father drove a delivery route for a regional bakery and balanced the family checkbook at the kitchen table every Sunday night with a mechanical pencil and a coffee can of receipts. He was smiling in the photograph the way he smiled at me on the morning we got married. "That's my fiancé," the young woman at the next desk said, turning the silver frame toward me like she was sharing the best secret in the world. "We're getting married in the spring, 2 years together, and he still makes me feel like the only person in the room." The office smelled of fresh paint and burnt coffee from a machine that had not been cleaned since the building opened. Somewhere behind me, a printer warmed up with a low, mechanical hum. I had practiced this morning in the mirror. Stand straight. Soft handshake. Warm, but not eager. 40 isn't the age you announce yourself. It's the age you let the work speak. I had repeated all of that to myself in the car. I had not practiced this. Because the man in that photograph, the one in the pale linen shirt with the water of Kiawah Island behind him, was my husband, Daniel. The same Daniel who had pressed a cup of coffee into my hands an hour earlier and told me to go be brilliant on my first day. I did not drop my bag. I did not make a sound. I set my laptop on the desk, sat down in the cold, ergonomic chair, and felt the floor of my whole life quietly fall away beneath me without a single thing in the room moving. My name is Vivian Ashford. I am 39 years old, and I spent 11 years auditing other people's lives for a living before I ever learned to see my own. By the end of that month, my husband would learn that the quietest person in any room is usually the one keeping the records. Let me back up, because the photograph was not the beginning. The photograph was just the day I started counting. I grew up in a house where money was a held breath. My father drove a delivery route for a regional bakery and balanced the family checkbook at the kitchen table every Sunday night with a mechanical pencil and a coffee can of receipts. I used to sit beside him and watch him reconcile the month to the penny. If a number was off by 11 cents, he would not go to bed until he found the 11 cents. People thought he was strange. I thought he was the most honest man alive. He taught me that numbers do not have feelings, and that this is exactly why you can trust them. People lie. Ledgers don't. So I became the thing I was built to be. A forensic accountant. The person hospitals and foundations and city auditors call when the money in the spreadsheet stops matching the money in the world. I am very good at it. I notice the 11 cents. I notice the gap between what people say and what the statement says. And I have learned, over 11 years, that the gap is always where the truth is hiding. I met Daniel when I was 28, at a fundraiser I had been hired to audit. He was 32 then, charming in a way that did not feel like a performance, with rolled-up sleeves and ink on his hands from sketching a building on a cocktail napkin. He wanted to build things, real things, he said, places where people would live and grow old. I fell for the way he looked at a vacant lot and saw a future. We married a year later. We bought a narrow, old, single house south of Broad in Charleston, the kind with a side porch and heart pine floors that creak in 3 specific places, and we spent 9 years filling it. His development projects were small at first, then larger. There were lean years where his deals stalled, and I carried the mortgage alone without ever making him feel it. There was the year I turned down a promotion in Atlanta because he was close to closing his first big project, and I did not want to pull him off course. I told myself partnership meant taking turns being the strong one, and that someday it would be my turn. There was also the thing we did not talk about. 6 years ago, I lost a pregnancy at 5 months, a girl, and the grief nearly hollowed me out. Daniel held me through it. I remember thinking, in the worst of it, that whatever else was true, this was a man who would not leave. A man who showed up when it was hard. I built the next several years of trust on that single belief. It is a strange thing to discover that the moment you decided someone was good is the exact moment they started learning how to use it. That is the part nobody warns you about. The betrayal does not begin the day you find out. It begins years earlier, in the soft tissue of your faith in them, and by the time you see it, it has already grown a spine. I had taken the position at the Low Country Children's Medical Foundation to start something of my own again. Director of Financial Compliance. A clean desk, a serious mission, a chance to feel like the person I was before grief made me small. I was happy that morning. Genuinely happy. The young woman at the next desk was named Brooke Calloway, 26, donor relations. She had the kind of brightness that fills a room before she's finished walking into it, and a framed photograph of my husband on the corner of her desk, next to a small jar of paper clips and a half-dead succulent she clearly kept forgetting to water. If you have ever sat very still inside a moment that is destroying you while your face does something completely unrelated, you already know the rest of this story in your body. Stay with me. I promise it does not end where you think. I did not confront her. I want to be honest about why, because it matters. It was not strength, not at first. It was the bakery kitchen and my father and the coffee can of receipts. My entire training, my entire nervous system said the same thing the way it always does when a number is wrong. Don't react. Reconcile. Find the 11 cents before you accuse anyone of stealing it. So I smiled. I asked the small, aloud questions a new coworker asks. He's handsome, I said. How did you two meet? Brooke lit up. He had given a talk at a real estate luncheon almost 2 years earlier, she said, about building affordable housing that didn't look cheap, and she had walked right up to him afterward and refused to let him be modest about it. He told me later I was the first person in years who made him want to actually go home at night, she said. He works so much. He's building his own firm now, but he always makes time for me. His own firm. I held that. She held up her left hand without my asking. The ring caught the fluorescent light and threw it back like a blade. A real stone, an expensive cut, the kind of ring a man buys when he wants there to be no question. I had a thin gold band on my own hand. Daniel had told me, years ago, that he didn't believe in showy rings, that a marriage shouldn't be measured in carats. I had been proud of that. I had repeated it to friends as proof of what kind of man I'd married. I understood, sitting there, that he had not been against the showy ring. He had just been saving it. It's beautiful, I said. When did he propose? 3 months ago. She traced the glass of the photo frame with one finger, the way you touch something you can't believe you get to keep. On the water, off Kiawah, he chartered a sailboat just for the two of us. He said he wanted the proposal to be somewhere that was only ours, with no history attached to it. Somewhere with no history attached. That sentence went in like a splinter and stayed. Because I knew that linen shirt in the photograph. I had bought it for him at a little shop on King Street for our 7th anniversary. And I knew Kiawah. Daniel and I had spent a weekend there the spring before, and he had told me he hated boats, that the water made him queasy, that he only went out because a client insisted. I kept my face exactly where it was. That is a skill, keeping your face where it is. I learned it in conference rooms full of men who had been stealing for years and needed me to believe I hadn't noticed yet. "What does he do now?" I asked. "You said his own firm." "Real estate development. It's called Magnolia Reach Partners." She said the name with so much pride it almost hurt to watch. "He's doing this gorgeous condo project. The flagship building is going to be called the Callaway." She pressed her hand to her chest. "He named it after me." Can you believe that? He named a whole building after me. I could believe it. That was the trouble. I could believe every single word she said, and every single word she said was a brick out of the foundation of the house I'd been living in for 9 years. I turned back to my monitor. On the screen was a compliance dashboard, columns of clean, reconciled numbers, the one kind of order I have always been able to count on. I rested my hands on the keyboard. I let my fingernails press into my palms until the small pain gave me something to hold. I did not cry. There is a difference between not crying and being fine, and I had learned it years ago in a hospital room. I was not fine. But I did not cry. One thought arrived, complete and calm, the way the right answer sometimes arrives after hours of staring at a spreadsheet. I need to see the books. If you have ever had to keep working with your hands while your life caved in behind your eyes, tell me in the comments below. You are not the only one who learned to do that. This channel is full of people who learned to do that. Now let me tell you what I found when I finally opened the books. That night, I made dinner. I want you to sit with how strange that is. I roasted a chicken because Daniel liked the way I did it with lemon and thyme, and I set the table in our beautiful old dining room with the heart pine floor, and when he came home at 7:40, he kissed the top of my head and said, "There she is, the working woman. How was day 1? "Good," I said. "Quiet. Onboarding mostly." "Meet anyone interesting?" I turned to the chicken with a serving fork so I would have a reason to look away. "Not really. Everyone's nice. There's a young woman at the next desk in donor relations." He didn't even flinch. "That's good. You should make friends." He poured himself a glass of wine. "I've got a brutal couple of weeks coming up. Site stuff. I might be late a lot." I had heard site stuff 100 times over the last 2 years and never once heard it. I heard it now. It rang like a struck glass. Over dinner, I watched him the way I watch a set of financials that a CEO swears are clean. Not for the lie, for the tells. The small overcorrections. The unprompted detail that nobody asked for. He told me, without my asking, that he'd had a working lunch at a place out on Folly with 2 investors and the food had been terrible. People who are telling the truth don't usually rate the food. After he fell asleep, I lay in the dark with my heart going steady and hard, not fast, and I made a decision that surprised me with how little it shook. I was not going to scream. I was not going to throw the lemon chicken at the wall. I was going to do the only thing I have ever truly known how to do. I was going to reconcile the month, and then the year, and then the marriage. The next morning, I was at my desk at the foundation before anyone else. I opened a fresh document, and I started a record. Not a diary. A ledger. Date. Source. Fact. And a column my father taught me to keep called verified by, because a fact you can't source is just a feeling wearing a fact's clothes. Entry 1. Brooke Callaway, donor relations. Engaged to a man matching Daniel's photograph. Name unconfirmed by her directly. Verified by photograph on her desk, my own eyes. I needed his name out of her mouth. So that morning I brought her a coffee from the lobby cart. Oat milk, which I'd noticed she drank. And I asked the question gently, like it cost me nothing. What did you say your fiancé's name was? Daniel, she said, glowing. Daniel Ashford. There it was. I wrote it down with a hand that did not shake. And I want you to understand that the steadiness was not peace. The steadiness was the thing my whole life had been building toward without my knowing it. Over the next 9 days, I learned how a man builds a second life, and I learned it the way I learn everything, in receipts. I am going to give you the itemized list because the cumulative weight is the only thing that can carry across a screen what it carried across my chest. 2 years ago, in the spring, Daniel told me he was taking a stress management sabbatical from a men's group at our church. That was the spring the real estate luncheon happened. That was where he met her. 18 months ago, he refinanced one of his small projects and told me the closing had cost more than expected and we'd be tight for a quarter. I covered the difference out of my own account, the way I had a dozen times, because partnership means taking turns. I now know that quarter is when Magnolia Reach Partners was registered with the state. 14 months ago, on the night he told me he was in Savannah at a zoning hearing, he was at a rooftop dinner in Charleston. I know because Brooke posted a photograph of 2 wine glasses against a sunset, and resting in the bottom corner of the frame was a man's hand on the table, and on that hand was a plain gold wedding band, and beside the glass was the worn leather weekender bag I had given Daniel for his 40th birthday. He had told me he lost that bag in an airport. 11 months ago, I gave up a weekend I'd planned for the two of us because he said he had to fly to a developers conference in Nashville. There was no conference. I checked. There is no version of that weekend that exists anywhere except in the sentence he told me. 7 months ago, he came home from what he called a late site walk, and there was a charge on a card I rarely check, $680 at a resort on Kiawah on a Tuesday. I remember that Tuesday. I had made soup and waited up, and he had texted that he was too tired to talk and would just crash at the office cot. We do not have an office cot. Here is the part I am most ashamed of, and I'll say it plainly because someone watching needs to hear it. I almost saw it once. About a year ago, I noticed a recurring transfer leaving our joint account on the same Friday each month, $800, labeled DG Consulting. I asked him about it over dinner. He didn't even look up from his plate. He said it was a retainer for a design consultant on a project, told me the man's name, told me a story about a rezoning, and then asked me how my mother was doing, and I let it go. I let it go because the alternative to letting it go was a question I was not ready to ask. DG. I found out later it stood for nothing. It was just a label boring enough that I would never check it twice. He had learned that about me, that I would always choose the small explanation over the large fear. That is the cruelest thing love does to a careful person. It makes you careless in exactly one direction. Each of these, on its own, I could have explained away. That is the genius of how it's done. No single brick looks like a wall. He gave me 1 brick at a time, spaced out over 2 years, and trusted that I would never stack them. He did not know what I do for a living. I mean, he knew the title. He did not know what the title does. Stacking bricks until the wall is undeniable is not my hobby. It is my profession. He married an auditor and then spent 2 years committing exactly the kind of fraud that auditors are built to catch, and he relaxed completely because the auditor loved him. I kept the ledger growing. I told no one. At the foundation, I was warm and competent and on time. At home, I roasted chickens and asked about his day and let him kiss the top of my head. Brooke kept talking, because Brooke had no reason not to. She told me about the venue deposit and the dress fittings and the honeymoon in Portugal he'd promised her. Every word she gave me, I wrote down. She thought she was telling a friend about her happiness. She was dictating a deposition, and she did not know it. There was one afternoon I almost broke. She leaned over the partition with her phone and said, "Vivian, you're so calm and put together. Can I ask you something? Is it normal to feel scared, right? Before you marry someone? Like, what if I don't really know him? For 1 second, I wanted to take her young face in both my hands and tell her everything. She was not my enemy. She was a girl who had walked up to the wrong man at a luncheon and believed his version of himself, the same as I had. The cruelty was never hers. "It's normal to be scared," I said. "Just make sure you know where his money comes from. That's all. Know the money, and you'll know the man." She laughed like that was a quirky thing for an accountant to say. "You're funny," she said. I was not being funny. The day everything turned, I was not even looking for it. I was at home, alone, reconciling our actual household accounts, the boring monthly thing my father raised me to do, when I pulled up the home equity line of credit on our house. We almost never touch it. It exists for emergencies, and drawing on it requires both our signatures because the house is jointly owned. I expected a balance of zero. The balance was $180,000. The room did not spin. I want to be precise because I think the movies lie about this. The room did not spin. The room got very still and very clear, the way the air goes before a storefront window breaks. I clicked into the draw history. One transaction, 6 weeks earlier. And there, attached as a scanned PDF, was the authorization form, with my signature on it. I have signed my name perhaps 1,000,000 times. I know my own signature, the way you know your own heartbeat. This was not it. It was close. It was a careful, practiced forgery. The V too round. The tail of the final letter dragged a hair too long. He had practiced it. You don't get that close by accident. He had sat somewhere with my real signature in front of him and practiced mine until it would pass a bored loan officer's glance. And then I followed the money, because following the money is the one thing in this world I have never once failed to do. The $180,000 went into an account I'd never seen, in the name of Magnolia Reach Partners, LLC. From there, it fanned out. A title deposit on a downtown parcel, a vendor I didn't recognize, and a series of smaller transfers, $62,000 across the year to a personal account belonging to a B. Calloway. The ring, the dress, the Portugal honeymoon I had paid for without knowing it. There was more. He had moved $140,000 out of our joint brokerage account in 3 quiet transactions, each one just small enough not to trip an alert, each one dressed up in the transfer notes as a tax reserve. I read those notes and I almost laughed, because that is exactly the move. That is the embezzler's signature move, the boring label on the bleeding wound. I have caught CFOs doing precisely that. I have sat across a table from a man and watched his career end because of a transfer he labeled tax reserve. I sat back in my father's old desk chair, which I had moved into our house after he died, and I let the cold settle all the way in. This was not an affair. An affair is a man who is weak. This was an enterprise. My husband had taken the equity in the home where I lost our daughter, forged my name to do it, used it and our savings to capitalize a company, gifted a piece of that company to the woman he was going to marry, and named the flagship building after her. He had built his entire new life with my money, my house, and my name. And he had done it while kissing the top of my head every morning. I did not make a vow out loud. People who make vows out loud are usually trying to convince themselves. I just opened a new tab, started a clean folder, and named it with the only word that fit: reconciliation. Then I picked up the phone and called the one person in Charleston I trusted with all of it. Diane Okafor and I had worked the same fraud case 4 years earlier, me on the numbers, her on the law. She was the kind of attorney who listened in complete silence and then asked the one question that reorganized everything. I told her everything in order, the way I'd recorded it, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Vivian," she said, "I need you to hear me clearly. The affair is the least interesting thing you just told me. I know. The forged signature on the equity line is bank fraud. Moving marital assets into an entity and gifting equity to a third party is going to get clawed straight back in the divorce, and depending on how he papered it, There may be people he's defrauded who are not you. Has he raised outside money for this firm yet? He's closing his construction financing soon, I said. There's a dinner, investors, a lender, Brooks going as his co-founder. I heard Diane exhale slowly through the phone. Then you have a decision to make, and only you can make it. We can do this quietly. Letters, filings, a settlement. He keeps his dignity, you get your money, no one in that ballroom ever knows. Or, I said, or you let the truth arrive in the one room where it costs him everything. I won't tell you which. But I will tell you this. If he forged your name on a federal bank document and then walks into a room and asks people to wire money against your house, the most legally protected thing you can possibly do is make sure those people know the guarantee is fraudulent before they sign. That's not revenge. That's you refusing to be the collateral on a lie. I looked out the window at the side porch where Daniel and I used to drink coffee on Sundays. I thought about the 11 cents. I thought about my father, who would have walked into that ballroom and laid the receipts on the table without raising his voice, because the receipts don't need a raised voice. Send me a document request list, I said. I'm going to bring you a clean file. Everything sourced. Everything verified. That, said Diane, is the most terrifying sentence I've ever heard a wife say. The next 2 weeks were the strangest performance of my life. I want to walk you through the preparation, because if you have ever had to smile at someone over breakfast while quietly disassembling everything they've done to you, this is the part where you'll feel least alone. In the mornings, I was the supportive wife. I made the coffee. I asked about his site stuff. I let him tell me his small, confident lies, and I filed each one without a flicker. At the foundation, I was warm to Brooke. I was warmer than I had ever been, because I had stopped being angry at her entirely, and that kind of warmth is easy to fake because half of it is real. In the evenings, after he left for his late walks, I built the file. I pulled the equity line authorization and ran my real signature beside the forgery, dated and labeled. I pulled the brokerage statements and traced every tax reserve transfer to its landing point, dollar for dollar, with the transaction IDs. I built a single clean spreadsheet that started at our joint accounts and ended at a building with another woman's name on it. Every arrow sourced. I had Diane pull the Magnolia Reach operating agreement from the state filing, and there it was in black and white. Brooke Calloway, managing member, 15% membership interest. Contributed capital, $0. He had given her a seventh of a company built entirely from money he stole from me, and her contribution to it was loving him. I did one thing my father would not have approved of, and I'll own it. I let Brooke help me build the case without knowing she was building it. One afternoon, she rolled her chair over, glowing as usual. Vivian, you're a finance person. Daniel's putting together this whole pitch for his investor dinner, and I'm helping with the deck. Would you look at the numbers? I want to sound smart for him. She emailed me the entire pitch deck, the capitalization table, the use of funds, the lender's term sheet with the personal guarantee attached, the one pledging our house with the careful forgery of my name, scanned right into the appendix. She handed me with a hopeful smile the last document I needed. It's beautiful work, I told her honestly. He's lucky to have someone who'd do this for him. I'd do anything for him, she said. I know you would, I said. That's what makes it sad. She tilted her head, not understanding, and went back to her desk humming. There was one evening I needed to see it with my own eyes, not just on paper. The address on the Magnolia Reach filings was a small office above a coffee shop on a side street downtown. I told Daniel I was meeting an old colleague for dinner, which for once was not entirely a lie, because Diane and I did eat afterward. I parked across the street as the light went orange over the rooftops, and I watched the second-floor windows. Around 7, they came out together, Daniel and Brooke, his hand at the small of her back, and they stood under the street lamp talking and laughing about something I couldn't hear. He looked relaxed in a way I had not seen him look at home in over a year. He looked like a man on the easy side of a secret. I did not feel rage watching them. I felt a strange, clinical calm, the way I feel when a fraud finally shows me its whole shape. I took 2 photographs, not to wound myself, but because a careful record never hurts, and I added a line to the ledger. Then I drove to dinner and reconciled the rest of it with Diane over a plate of shrimp and grits. And I slept better that night than I had in weeks, which I know sounds impossible, but the worst part of betrayal is the not knowing. And I finally knew. There was one near miss. I keep the building of the case on an encrypted drive, but one night I left my personal laptop open on the kitchen island while I went to answer the door, and when I came back, Daniel was standing in front of it. My heart did a single, hard knock. The screen was dark, asleep, but he was close enough to have woken it. "You left this open," he said, and for one suspended second I did not know what he had seen. Then he smiled. "You work too hard. You know that?" He had assumed it was foundation work. He had no framework in which his wife was building a case against him because the auditor loved him, and a man who is loved cannot imagine being audited. I took the laptop, kissed his cheek, and said he was right. I work too hard. And I went upstairs and added a new rule to my own discipline. Never leave the door of the war room open, not even for a second. Not even for him. I had one last thing to do before the dinner, and Diane called it the final test. Though I didn't tell her that's what it was for me. I gave Daniel one chance. It was a Sunday. We were on the side porch with coffee, the heart pine boards creaking, the way we used to be. I said carefully, "Daniel, be straight with me about one thing. Is the firm okay? The money. Are we exposed on the house in any way I should know about?" He looked at me with those warm, steady eyes I had built 6 years of faith on, and he reached over and squeezed my knee. "Babe, the house has nothing to do with any of it," he said. "I'd never put our home at risk. You know me." That was the moment, if you want to know. Not the photograph. Not the equity line. This, the chance, offered freely, to tell one true thing, and the easy, loving way he chose the lie instead, with his hand on my knee. "I do know you," I said, and I drank my coffee, and I let the test close. The dinner was Thursday. Diane was on standby. The file was clean and sourced and verified. And I went to a small boutique on King Street, not far from the shop where I'd bought the linen shirt that started all of this. And I bought one dress. Not a dress to be looked at. A dress to be reckoned with. Deep charcoal, sharp at the shoulder. The kind of thing you wear when you have stopped asking the room's permission to exist. I had my hair done. I looked at myself in the salon mirror, and I did not see the woman who had waited up with soup. I saw my father's daughter, holding the coffee can, 11 cents from the truth. The Palmetto room at the Harleston Hotel glowed amber. Round tables, white linen, candlelight. A string trio playing something gentle near the windows. Maybe 30 people, developers, and brokers, and money. The men in good jackets, the women in good jewelry, all of them holding glasses of something pale and expensive. At the front of the room, a screen showed a rendering of a sleek building against the Charleston sky, and, across the bottom in clean letters, the Callaway, Magnolia, Reach Partners. Daniel was at the center of it, of course. He was made for rooms like this. Custom navy jacket, easy laugh, his hand on a shoulder here, a forearm there, every gesture saying, "Trust me." And beside him, in pale blue, her ring catching the candlelight, stood Brooke. She was looking up at him the way I once looked up at a man sketching a building on a napkin. I stood in the doorway long enough to see all of it. A hostess approached with a clipboard and a tray of blank name cards. "Welcome. Are you with the Magnolia Reach event? May I have a name for your card?" I took the silver pen and wrote 2 words in clear, deliberate letters. Vivian Ashford. I pressed the card to my charcoal shoulder and walked in. No one noticed me at first. I lifted a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking and moved through the warm room, unhurried, until I was perhaps 15 feet from the center of it. And then Daniel, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, with one hand raised toward the rendering of the building he'd named after another woman, turned his head and saw me. I have audited men in the exact second they realize the thing they've hidden has been found. There is a specific way the face goes. The color drains downward, like water leaving a glass. The performing muscles forget their job. For one full second, the most charming man in any room became a man with nowhere to stand. "Vivian," he said. It came out cracked. Brooke turned, delighted, because to her, I was a friend. "Vivian, oh my gosh, you came? I didn't know you knew about—" And then she registered her own fiancé's face, and the sentence died in her mouth. I stopped a comfortable distance from both of them. Calm. Pleasant. Loud enough for the nearest tables to hear without my ever raising my voice. "Daniel," I said, "aren't you going to introduce me?" He couldn't. His mouth opened and produced nothing. So I turned, just slightly, to the gray-haired man beside him, who I happened to know from the term sheet was the anchor of the whole deal. Russell Crane. A construction lender who had been underwriting Charleston buildings since before Brooke was born. "Mr. Crane," I said, "I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm Vivian Ashford, Daniel's wife. We've been married for 9 years. The word wife landed in that warm amber room like a glass dropped on stone. Conversations near us stopped. Brooke made a small sound and her hand came off Daniel's arm as if it had burned her. "Wife?" she whispered. "Daniel, what is she—" "You said—" "Vivian, please," Daniel managed, stepping toward me, finding his salesman's voice from somewhere. "This is a private matter. It has nothing to do with— Let's step outside." "It has everything to do with this room," I said, and I opened the slim leather folder I'd carried in. "Because before any of these good people wires $1 against the personal guarantee in your deck, they should know that the guarantee pledges a house they're being told is fully yours to pledge. It isn't. It's half mine, and my signature on it." I laid the page on the white linen, my real signature beside the forged one, dated, labeled, the way my father taught me. Is a forgery. He never asked me. He practiced my name and signed it himself. Russell Crane is not a man who reacts. He picked up the page. He looked at the two signatures for a long, quiet moment, the way a man reads a contract he is about to refuse to honor. Then he set his glass down on the table, slowly, with the finality of a gavel. "Daniel," he said, and his voice carried without effort, the way real authority always does. "Is this your wife's signature on the guarantee, or isn't it?" "Russell, I can explain the—" "It's a yes or no question. Did she sign this document?" The silence stretched. Daniel looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years, maybe in 9, he had no version of himself ready. "No," I said quietly, for him, because he couldn't. "She didn't." I laid the rest down. Then, one page at a time, the way I'd learned to do it in conference rooms, each page worse than the last. The equity line. The brokerage transfers labeled tax reserve. The operating agreement with Brooke Calloway listed as a 15% member who had contributed nothing, the $62,000 in personal transfers. I didn't narrate it like an attack. I narrated it like an auditor reading findings, which is so much worse. Because there is nothing in the world more damning than calm. Russell Crane turned to the room. "I think we're done here tonight," he said. "I'd advise everyone to hold any commitments." He looked at Daniel one more time, with something past anger, something closer to disgust. "You don't fund a man who forges his own wife. That's not a risk profile. That's a crime." A woman at the nearest table, a broker I'd later learn had brought 2 of the evening's biggest investors, stood and gathered her clutch. "I vouched for you to people in this room, Daniel," she said, and her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I put my own name next to yours." She didn't wait for an answer. There's a particular sound a room makes when a man's reputation leaves it, and it isn't loud. It's the soft rustle of 30 people deciding all at once that they were never really his friends. And then the most ordinary, devastating thing happened. People left. Not in a rush. In ones and twos, gathering coats, avoiding eyes, the way people leave the scene of something they don't want to be remembered standing near. The string trio faltered and stopped. The screen still glowed. The Callaway behind the man whose empire was emptying out in real time. Brooke stood frozen, tears cutting through her makeup, her ringed hand pressed to her mouth. "You knew," she said to me, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a child realizing the floor was never solid. "When I showed you the deck, when I asked you to look at the numbers, you knew the whole time." "I knew the first day," I said gently. "I'm sorry, Brooke. None of this was your fault. He built it on both of us." She turned to Daniel, and whatever she saw in his face finished it. "You named a building after me," she said, "with her money," and she pulled the ring off her finger and set it on the white linen next to my forged signature, and she walked out of that room and out of his life without looking back, which I thought, even then, was the bravest thing anyone did all night. And then there were two of us, the way it began. Daniel and I stood in the wreckage of his beautiful evening, the candles still burning, the rendering still glowing, the abandoned glasses going warm on 30 empty tables. "Are you proud of yourself?" he said. His voice shook with the only thing he had left, which was fury. "You burned the whole thing down. Years of work. You couldn't just talk to me." I looked at this man I had loved, had grieved with, had built 9 years around, and I waited to feel the rage I had earned. It didn't come. What came instead was the strangest, lightest feeling, like setting down a weight so old you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. "I didn't burn anything, Daniel," I said. "You built a house out of stolen money and forged paper, and you handed me the matches yourself the morning you told me the house was never at risk. I didn't even strike them. I just turned the lights on so everyone could see what you'd already built. You've destroyed me. You always called me the careful one," I said. Like it was a small thing. The careful one. "You should have remembered what careful people keep." I closed the empty folder. "We keep the receipts." I set my untouched champagne on the nearest table. "Diane Okafor will have papers to you Monday. We're going to sell the house. You're going to return every dollar, and you're going to answer to Mr. Crane's bank for the signature, not to me. I'm done being the collateral on your second life." I walked the long way out, my heels steady on the marble, the amber light falling behind me. I did not look back at the screen with her name on it. There was nothing on it that belonged to me. Out on the street, the Charleston night was warm and salt-smelling and loud, with the ordinary noise of people who had no idea the world had just rearranged itself. My phone buzzed. "Diane." "Well?" she said. "It's done," I said. "He lost the lender. He lost the firm. He lost the girl. And the house? The money?" I looked up at the dark sky over the steeples. "Those we take back on Monday, the honest way, with paper." Diane laughed, low and fierce. "Vivian, your father would be insufferable right now." I laughed too, for the first time in 2 weeks. And it surprised me how much it sounded like relief. 6 months later, the Heartpine floors belonged to someone else. We sold the house south of Broad to a young family with 2 small kids, and I stood on the side porch one last time and let myself say goodbye to the rooms that held the best and the worst of my life, including a grief I will carry forever and a love I had to learn was never quite real. Then I closed the door and gave them the keys and did not cry, which I count as its own small victory. Daniel did not go to prison, though for a while it was close. The bank declined to fund the project the night Russell Crane set his glass down, and Magnolia Reach Partners dissolved before it ever poured a foundation. The forged guarantee became a problem he is still untangling with attorneys far more expensive than the ones he can now afford. In the divorce, every dollar he moved came back, traced and clawed and returned, because it turns out the move he relied on, labeling the bleeding wound tax reserve, is the exact move that makes a forensic accountant smile. He lives in a rented place across the river now. The building with her name on it exists only as a rendering on a screen that no longer turns on. I think about Brooke sometimes. She left the foundation a few weeks after that night, which I understood. Before she went, she stopped at my desk, and neither of us quite knew what to say. "I'm sorry I had his picture on my desk," she finally said, which broke my heart a little. "I'm sorry it was the wrong picture to want," I told her. "We are not friends. We were never going to be. But I hope she marries a man someday who doesn't have to name a building after her to prove that he means it." As for me, I left the foundation too, on good terms, with a recommendation from Walter Reese that I keep framed in my new office, because I started something of my own. A small forensic accounting practice. 2 desks, good light, my father's old chair behind one of them. We do exactly the work I was built for. People come to me when the money in the spreadsheet has stopped matching the money in the world, and I find the gap, and the gap, as always, is where the truth is hiding. Last month, I helped a woman recover savings her business partner had quietly drained for 3 years. When she got the wire confirming the money was back, she put her head down on my conference table and wept. I let her. Then I made her tea and we reconciled the rest of it, to the penny. I keep a green cloth-bound ledger on my desk. People ask about it sometimes. This old-fashioned book in a digital office. I tell them it was my father's habit, that he balanced the month to the 11 cents and never went to bed until the numbers were honest. I don't tell them the other thing, that for one terrible month, the only ground I could stand on was a ledger, that I built my way out of the worst betrayal of my life, one sourced entry at a time, and that the steadiness I learned at a kitchen table as a child turned out to be the strongest thing I owned. Here is what I know now, that I did not know on my first day of work, when a kind young woman turned a silver frame toward me and called my husband her fiancé. Trust is the one account you cannot overdraw and then quietly refill. He found that out in front of 30 people. And walking away with the house gone and the marriage gone and the man gone is not the same thing as losing. Sometimes it is the first honest balance sheet you have ever held. I am not the woman who weighed it up with soup. I am the one who keeps the receipts. If you have ever sat very still inside a moment that was breaking you and kept your face exactly where it was and decided quietly that you would not scream, you would reconcile, then this story was always about you, not me. Tell me in the comments. Would you have spoken on the first day, or would you have waited and built the file and turned on the lights when it counted? And where are you watching from tonight? I read every one of these. We are a room full of people who learned to keep our faces where they are. And there is no one I would rather be in a room with. If quiet strength is your kind of story, if you believe the careful ones are the ones nobody should underestimate, subscribe and stay with us here at Burn Bridges Club. There is always another bridge, and there is always a reason it burned. I will see you at the next one.